right, so here's a question. If Paul is saying, hey, physical appearance and powerful speaking is not the most important issue, is this not self-serving on Paul's part, since some people viewed him as kind of short with a squeaky voice and not all that impressive? Of course it could be self-serving. The only problem with that interpretation would be this: he's not the only one to make comments like that. He's not the only one to assert those kinds of things, and so if it were only Paul, then that would be a really valid question, and it's a valid question anyway. I'm just saying, if Paul were the only one, we could say, well, wait a minute, maybe Paul's underestimating God uses these other things. But I give you a few other examples. Remember when David is ordained or anointed as king of Israel, that they can't pick out one of the sons of Jesse because all the good-looking, tall, handsome, old enough ones are all come through, and Samuel's like, God tells Samuel they're not the ones, and then God tells Samuel, people look on the outside, but I look on the heart. So there's a good example from King David in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, Jesus intentionally picks 12 disciples who are uneducated, poor, and lack the kind of fundamental skills that would impress. Because you remember in Acts chapter 3, 4, and 5, it says that the Sanhedrin says, realizing that they are uneducated men and that they have been with Jesus, they're perplexed at their teaching and ability and power demonstrated in the miracle done by John and Peter. And so in Acts chapter 3 and 4, you get hint that Jesus picked people who wouldn't fit the criteria that the church at Corinth was looking for either. And so there's other places in the New Testament as well where we find that God is primarily concerned about the content, the character of the heart of an individual, the content of their words, their consistency in honoring Christ, and that if a person is particularly gifted orator, or a person is particularly gifted in physical appearance, that those are not evil per se, but they can become evil if that's all they're relying upon and ignore the content importance or things like that. So that's a great question, because it does seem like that's a little bit self-serving for Paul to say those kinds of things. But Paul is saying them in concert with the rest of the Scripture, that the rest of the Scripture cautions us against following after individuals purely on external things, and instead checking the heart and the content of their message is really critical. And so there's several examples of that: King David, the disciples, Paul, that show us that those are important, that the heart of the person and the content of their message are more important than their external appearance or wealth or prestige or things like that. Good question, though. The second question is a request and asks me to post the poem and interpretation of the poem from Esther on Kim's book, If I Perish. And I can put that to the Facebook page. I'll go do that right now. Esther on Kim was a persecuted Christian leader in Korea when the Japanese took over and forced the worship of the emperor. She refused to bow, along with about 47 other Christian pastors and church leaders. Of the 47, 14 of them survived the 6-year imprisonment by the Japanese government. And she's one of the 14 that survived. Several times she could have died. But there's a point in there where she is asked to write a poem about, or write an essay about her experiences. And instead she writes a 4-line poem, and the interpretation of it when she appears before the judge is quite touching. And so I'll put that out on our Matthew Road Facebook page for people to be able to read. All right, we will see you guys on Sunday morning.